Welcome to CSS with Ahmed. In this video, we'll walk through a full model essay for Topic 4 of the CSS 2026 English essay paper, Emerging Multipolar World Order, Opportunities and Risks for Pakistan. Let's begin with the outline. This essay is structured in 7 parts: Introduction, Understanding Multipolarity, Historical Context, Drivers of the Emerging Order, Opportunities for Pakistan, Risks and Challenges, and Conclusion. Introduction. For nearly 3 decades after the Cold War, international politics revolved around a single center of gravity, the United States. That unipolar moment, however, is unmistakably drawing to a close. In its place is emerging a more contested, multipolar order, one shaped not by a single hegemon but by several centers of power, including a rising China, a resurgent Russia, an increasingly assertive India, and a European Union and Gulf bloc, each pursuing more independent paths. For a middle power like Pakistan, positioned at the crossroads of South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East, this shift is neither a distant abstraction nor a purely academic debate. It carries direct consequences for the country's diplomacy, economy, and security. This essay argues that while an emerging multipolar order offers Pakistan genuine opportunities to diversify its partnerships and expand its strategic options, it simultaneously exposes the country to serious risks, from great power pressure to regional security dilemmas, that demand clear-eyed, coherent policymaking rather than reactive drift. Understanding multipolarity. A multipolar order is one in which power, military, economic, and diplomatic, is distributed among several major actors rather than concentrated in one or two. This differs fundamentally from the bipolarity of the Cold War, when the world organized itself around the United States and the Soviet Union, and from the unipolarity that followed 1991, when American primacy went largely unchallenged in military, economic, and even ideological terms. Multipolarity does not imply equality among powers. Rather, it implies that no single state can dictate outcomes without accounting for the interests, capabilities, and potential resistance of several others. The signs of this transition are visible across nearly every domain. China's economy now rivals that of the United States in purchasing power terms and leads the world in several manufacturing and technology sectors. Russia, despite extensive Western sanctions, continues to assert itself militarily and diplomatically across Eurasia and parts of Africa, and middle powers such as India, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and Brazil increasingly resist being treated as junior partners to any single bloc, instead pursuing what scholars now call multi-alignment. For countries like Pakistan, this is not merely a shift in rhetoric among global commentators, it is a structural change in the environment within which foreign policy must now be conducted. Historical context. World orders are not permanent. History offers repeated examples of their rise and eventual reordering. The concert of Europe that followed the Napoleonic Wars maintained a rough multipolar balance among European powers for much of the 19th century. The 2 world wars and their aftermath produced first a fragile multipolarity, then a bipolar contest between capitalist and communist blocs. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 produced what political scientists termed the unipolar moment, a period in which the United States faced no serious peer competitor. Yet history suggests such moments are typically transitional rather than permanent, as rising powers eventually seek a role commensurate with the growing capabilities. What distinguishes the current transition is its speed and its economic character. Unlike previous shifts driven primarily by military conquest, today's multipolarity is being built substantially through trade networks, infrastructure, financing, technological competition, and control over supply chains, arenas in which a country like Pakistan, despite lacking great power military capability, can still meaningfully participate. Drivers of the emerging order. Several forces are driving this transition. First is the sustained rise of China, which has transformed itself over 4 decades from a regional manufacturing base into a global leader in trade, infrastructure financing, and increasingly, advanced technology and artificial intelligence. Initiatives such as the Belt and Road Initiative, of which the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is a flagship component, reflect Beijing's ambition to shape a parallel economic order less dependent on Western-controlled financial institutions like the IMF and World Bank. Second is Russia's determination to reassert influence in its historical sphere, particularly across Eurasia and the Middle East, Despite the considerable costs imposed by Western sanctions following the Ukraine conflict, a determination that has, if anything, deepened Moscow's alignment with Beijing. Third, and often understated in popular discourse, is the relative decline of unchallenged American primacy, not a collapse of U.S. power, which remains formidable, but a growing recognition, even within Washington's own policy circles, that unilateral dominance is no longer sustainable, cost-effective, or politically popular domestically. Finally, the rise of assertive middle powers has added further poles to what was once a far simpler picture: India's growing economic and diplomatic weight and its ambition for a permanent UN Security Council seat, the European Union's search for strategic autonomy, independent of Washington, and the Gulf states' pursuit of genuinely independent foreign policies, exemplified by Saudi Arabia and the UAE maintaining working relationships with China, Russia, and the West simultaneously. Opportunities for Pakistan. This changing landscape offers Pakistan real, if conditional, opportunities. The most significant is diversification. In a unipolar or bipolar world, smaller and middle-sized states often have little practical choice but to align closely with a single patron, accepting the constraints that come with such dependency. A multipolar order allows Pakistan to cultivate substantive relationships with China, the Gulf states, and increasingly the United States and Europe simultaneously, rather than being forced into exclusive camps as it often was during the Cold War. This diversification, in turn, creates greater bargaining leverage. When multiple powers compete for influence and access in a region, smaller states can extract better terms, in trade agreements, investment flows, and security cooperation, than they could under a single dominant patron with few competitors. Pakistan's economic development also stands to benefit from access to multiple sources of capital and technology, rather than dependence on Western-led financial institutions and their attendant conditionalities alone. Chinese, Gulf, and increasingly other emerging market sources of investment offer at least the theoretical possibility of more flexible terms. Furthermore, Pakistan's geography, bridging South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East, positions it as a potential connectivity hub in a more multipolar economic landscape. Projects like CPEC, if managed transparently and expanded prudently, could allow Pakistan to become a genuine economic corridor linking multiple emerging poles of the global economy, rather than remaining a peripheral actor dependent on any single one. Finally, a multipolar world creates space for a more independent, interest-based foreign policy, one less defined by Cold War-era blocs and more by pragmatic calculations of national benefit on each specific issue. Risks and challenges for Pakistan. Yet these opportunities come bundled with serious risks. The most immediate is the pressure to choose sides. As US-China rivalry intensifies across trade, technology, and military domains, Pakistan finds itself courted and pressured simultaneously, expected by Washington, at various points, to limit certain forms of military or technological cooperation with Beijing, even as its deepest economic, infrastructural, and defense ties run through China. Navigating this rivalry without becoming a proxy battleground, and without alienating either partner unnecessarily, is one of the defining and most delicate challenges of Pakistani diplomacy today. Second, shifting global alignments sharpen regional security dilemmas rather than easing them. India's deepening strategic partnership with the United States, partly aimed at balancing China in the Indo-Pacific, has direct implications for the India-Pakistan-China strategic triangle, potentially narrowing Pakistan's room to maneuver in South Asia and increasing the risk of Pakistan being viewed primarily through the lens of the broader US-China contest rather than on its own merits. Third, there is a real risk of economic overdependence, not necessarily on the West this time, but potentially on China, given the scale of CPEC-related debt and infrastructure financing relative to Pakistan's overall economic capacity. A multipolar world does not automatically protect a state from dependency. It merely changes the identity of the power on which that dependency might rest, and in some respects, dependence on a single rising power can be as constraining as dependence on a single established one. Fourth, and perhaps most critically, Pakistan's ability to exploit these external opportunities is constrained by internal weaknesses, political instability, a fragile economy reliant on periodic IMF bailout programs, energy shortfalls, and governance challenges, all of which erode the credibility, consistency, and negotiating leverage needed to conduct an effective multi-aligned foreign policy. Finally, there is the risk of strategic drift. Without a clearly articulated doctrine defining what balanced alignment actually means in practice, Pakistan risks reacting to events rather than shaping outcomes, drifting between partners based on short-term pressures rather than a coherent long-term strategy. Conclusion. The emerging multipolar order is neither an unambiguous blessing nor an unmanageable threat for Pakistan. It is a structural shift that rewards agility, economic strength, and strategic clarity, and penalizes indecision, fragility, and short-termism. States that diversify their partnerships and pursue coherent rather than reactive foreign policies stand to gain meaningfully from a more distributed global order, extracting better terms and greater room to maneuver than a unipolar world ever afforded them. Those that remain economically fragile or diplomatically inconsistent, however, risk being pulled into the rivalries of larger powers rather than benefiting from the space multipolarity theoretically creates, becoming arenas for competition rather than genuine partners in it. For Pakistan, the central task is not to choose between opportunity and risk, since both are inherent and unavoidable features of the emerging order, but to build the internal strength and strategic clarity needed to seize the former while containing the latter, ensuring that in a world of many poles, Pakistan is treated as a partner worth courting on its own merits, not merely a territory to be contested by others. That was our model essay on the emerging multipolar world order and what it means for Pakistan. Thanks for watching. This has been CSS with Ahmed.